On December 6th, 2017, Scott Cawthon had posted a supposedly family-friendly FNAF spin-off game to Steam for his fans to enjoy during the holidays. Many of these fans, including myself, decided to install the game, not expecting much out of it save for maybe an hour or so of entertainment. The game was called Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, and upon opening the game, it didn't really seem like it would be anything special. It had simplistic, pixelated graphics, and it took the form of a top-down shooter-type game where the objective was to feed as many kids as possible with the pizza you made. This seemingly innocent kids game, however, would soon fall apart as you began to play it, revealing its true colors in the most disturbing way possible.
Begin tape. Leaving dead space. 3, 2, 1. The purpose of this tape is to test automated response times and reactions from vintage interactive attractions following audio stimuli. If you are playing this tape, that means that not only have you been checking outside at the end of every shift, as you were instructed to do, but also that you have found something that meets the criteria of your special obligations under paragraph 4.
When Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, aka FNAF 6, was released back in 2017, it was a game which caught everyone off guard in the community. It was a game which had no proper build-up to its release, and Scott himself claimed that it had been cancelled earlier in 2017. So there was no real way for any fans to be able to expect it to just suddenly drop for free, no less. With Pizzeria Sim acting as the newest main installment in the series, it not only brought back many longtime fans with the excitement of a new release, but it also managed to keep those fans invested with arguably the highest production quality any game in the series had up to that point. Thanks to the poll I hosted for what you guys wanted to be my 10k subscriber special, I, for the first time since the game came out, got the pleasure of doing a full playthrough of FNAF 6 all over again. And let me say, I am so damn happy this was the video idea which you all voted for. FNAF 6 is as good as a game in the series can get, in my opinion. It's a game with an insane amount of content that constantly and effectively juggles between fun and humorous minigames and some of the most stressful, terrifying scenarios from any horror game I've ever played. I was astounded when I first played through this game again by the sheer amount of effort that went into it by everyone involved, and it gave me an appreciation for an installment that I never really paid much mind to. And because of that experience, I want to take all the time I can in this video to shed light on every single little detail that made this game so spectacular to me, starting with the most important part of it all, its gameplay. The gameplay of FNAF 6 is as intuitive and unique as the series gets, in my opinion. FNAF 6 is a game which chooses to juggle itself between 3 different phases of gameplay, which I'll be calling the Tycoon phase, the Office phase, and the Salvage phase. Each of these phases of gameplay function entirely independently of the others, offering their own unique and entertaining experience. What I plan to do in this segment is go over each individual phase in depth, talking about their unique nuances in gameplay loops and why I love each and every one of them, starting with the most complex one, the Tycoon phase. The tycoon phase of Pizzeria simulators, where the actual name of the game comes from, acting as a top-down tycoon game where the player gets to build their own pizzeria. This phase of the game can be really jarring for someone coming into it after the other main series titles. I mean, it's completely different from anything we'd seen and has next to no horror elements present within it. But what this phase of the game lacks in horror, it makes up for in the addictive nature of trying to make as much money as possible to make the best pizzeria you can. The basic idea of the tycoon phase is that the player has access to a massive catalog where they can work towards buying a whole slew of different games, decorations, and animatronics to build their pizzeria with. The catalog introduced us to a lot of animatronics that would become fan favorites in the future, and would end up recurring in titles after Pizzeria Sim like Ultimate Custom Night and even Security Breach. Characters such as Music Man, the Mediocre Melodies, the Rockstar animatronics, and Lefty are all examples of animatronics who would later be used in other titles after this one, and it makes sense why. These animatronics, although originally just used as decorations, all have their own unique charm about them that make them really fun to purchase and see dancing around on stage. Each one of them brings their own unique personality into the game, which I feel the community would sorely miss if Pizzeria Sim was just treated as another strict horror title. I clearly remember just how excited I was when Ultimate Custom Night was announced, and we would actually get to see all of these animatronics fulfilling their roles as enemies with full voice acting and everything. All of these animatronics are really cool, and I love all their unique designs and personalities. However, if I were to pick a favorite out of these guys, that spot would have to go to Lefty. One of the best parts of seeing people's first time playthroughs of this game was just the utter shock of Lefty suddenly showing up for next to nothing, yet boasting the highest liability rating in the game. It was always really funny to watch people like Markiplier purchase this freaky black bear and immediately regret it the second he showed up on stage. And to me, nothing can beat the shock of when they move on to the office phase, only to encounter him as an enemy.
Security puppet. Lefty! Lefty is $5! Alright, whatever, I'm gonna buy Lefty. Come here, you. Maybe this was a horrible mistake. Maybe Lefty was a terrible error. Oh! Lefty! Lefty!
I feel like that twist made the character one of the most memorable parts of FNAF 6, and it made him my favorite part of watching other people's Let's Plays. I also just think his design is really cool, even if it is just a recolored Rockstar Freddy. The black and red mixed with the gold star and eyes just works for me, and I feel like he added a really cool mystery to the game from the moment he showed up. But I'll go a little more in depth on that later. Long tangent about animatronics aside, there is another huge part of the tycoon phase which I think made it so enjoyable, and that would be the mini-games. The mini-games are, in my opinion, the bread and butter of this phase of the game, acting as the main way to earn extra money to buy more things for your pizzeria, as well as having some dark secrets hidden within them. The mini-games have a huge variety of options to play, ranging from the fast-paced arcade games like Midnight Motorist to, well, the minigames are all very fun, and carry the same amount of fun personality I talked about with the animatronics you can purchase. They're filled with small jokes, usually at the expense of poor little Helpy, and they're a great way to try and earn points to buy that next big game you want for your pizzeria. I also really like the whole system Scott put in place for the play tokens used to play these little mini games. By having only a limited amount of play tokens every day, it gives the minigames a much more nostalgic arcadey feeling, where you want to make sure you get as much value out of every single minigame you play as possible. They also, oddly enough, add to the horror side of the game in my opinion, because the closer you get to running out of tokens means that you grow closer to having to enter the office phase. And to me at least, that added a lot of unexpected dread to what was essentially me playing with toys to buy more toys. There's a lot of really fun minigames in this phase. However, there are 3 that I found myself going to more than any of the other ones. The first one being Midnight Motorist. This minigame is awesome. The fast-paced gameplay makes it feel great when you're able to avoid all the oncoming cars like you're threading a needle. And the music blaring in the background makes it feel all the cooler, reminding me of an old-school racing game like F-Zero. Another minigame I really ended up loving was the riding rockets and the gravity flux. I sort of grouped these two together into one because of their very similar bullet hell type gameplay, and I just really love them both. I'm a sucker for any game which is all about weaving your way through a ton of different projectiles coming at you at once, and playing these minigames really fulfills that love of mine. I also just really love how when you lose, it just abruptly comes to a stop and Helpy looks like his world is just ending right in front of him. And anyway, the last minigame I'd like to shed some light on is the Carnival Hoops. I don't even know what it is about this one that I love so much, but this ends up being the minigame I always go back to the most. Maybe it's the challenge of landing in the little green window of opportunity every time, maybe it's the allure of that 5,000 point jackpot, or maybe it's just the cool sound that plays every single time you hit a score. But this minigame, it just does it for me. All of the minigames in Pizzeria Sim have some fun merit to them though, whether it be because of the laughs they provide with how nonsensical they can be, or for their naturally addictive nature. I also feel like they act as the perfect contrast to the next part of Pizzeria Sim's gameplay I want to talk about, that being the office phase. The office phase is easily the most Five Nights at Freddy's part of this game, if that makes sense, and it is by far the most stressful and terrifying portion the game has to offer. It's a very dark, unpredictable style of gameplay, where listening for whatever monsters are in the vents mean everything to your survival. What makes this particular part of the game so stressful is the same thing which I find terrifying about FNAF 4, being that you are constantly thrusted forward into danger, being forced to listen really closely for what's coming after you. The tools you have at your disposal in this phase are unreliable, stopping you from ever having one way of completing each night reliably. Without a reliable way to complete this phase of the game, you're constantly left trying to figure out to the best of your abilities what strategy works best for your way of playing out each night, usually ending in a lot of intense scares as you painfully trial and error your way through it. Even the best of strategies I've seen regarding this phase of gameplay can completely fall flat with bad enough luck, and I feel like that makes this particular game the most stressful experience you can get out of any in the series. Not necessarily the scariest, I still think FNAF 4 holds that title, but definitely the most stressful. Moving on from the randomness of this phase, however, I find there is one main mechanic tied to this part of the game, which makes it so stressful that I genuinely find it really difficult to play it. That mechanic being how you complete each night. You see, in most other FNAF games before this one, nights were simply completed by waiting for the time to hit 6 a.m. It was a time-based, reliable mechanic, which allowed the player to make decisions based on what would allow them to last long enough to survive. In this phase of Pizzeria Sim, however, that system gets thrown into the garbage and replaced with a new mechanic. In Pizzeria Sim, the player wins by completing all of the slow tasks on their computer before being able to log off for the night. This system is absolutely terrifying because it ties your surviving the night to a system which forces you into the most vulnerable state you can be. Sitting and staring at your monitor as you painstakingly wait for each task to complete, while waiting with bated breath for the sounds of animatronics approaching to either your left or your right. It's an absolutely terrifying experience, and it's one which I find myself constantly trying to avoid at all costs. In my playthrough, which you're watching right now, I find myself in between each office phase trying to stall as much as possible before moving on to the next. And when I realized that I was even doing that, it made me realize just how well made the horror of this section is. The randomness and unreliability of your tools, combined with the fact that survival is based off a system which leaves you completely vulnerable, works to create an experience which makes you sweat every single time you play through Pizzeria Simulator. And it's a part of the game I've grown to appreciate more than I ever did 5 years ago when I originally played it. I genuinely believe now that this portion of the game is one which can definitely compete with my absolute favorites, and it's only one of 3 very solid sections of a huge game. Speaking of those other 3 sections, let's move on to the final phase of FNAF 6's gameplay, the salvage phase.
Document results. Begin audio prompt in 3, 2, 1. Document results.
The salvage phase of Pizzeria Simulator is what I would describe as having the strongest atmosphere out of the 3 main phases of the game. During this phase, you find yourself locked in a pitch black room which is lit by only a single yellow light bulb, with one of the 4 main animatronics sitting across from you. This phase of the game is one which hinges its horror off of the atmosphere, rather than even the anticipation of the oncoming jump scares. Sitting and staring at an animatronic which can kill you at any second, all the while a distorted audio track plays in the background, is just extremely eerie. And it gets made even worse by the unpredictability of it. When I was watching Let's Players go through this game, I thought this phase was really simple. You just wait until you see the animatronic enter its pose where it looks ready to attack, and then you tase it. Do this until all prompts are complete, and bam, it should be done. But what caught me off guard when playing this game again myself is just how hard it is to tell when the animatronic in front of you is actually going to attack or not. There were times where the animatronic was sitting in its default pose, seemingly safe, and suddenly it was leaping forward to kill me, ending my salvages with a really bad scare. I found out later this was because each character you salvage actually has a unique piece of audio which can play during the salvage, and if you aren't quick enough or don't hear it, they kill you regardless of what stage they're at. This mechanic adds a whole other layer to what I initially thought was a really simple minigame, by forcing you to not only stare really closely at the animatronic at the table, but also listen really closely for this small audio cue. The game sets you up in 2 ways to get jump scared, both setting you up for the sudden change of the visuals, and for the loud scream that comes with them. This phase of the game is deceptively difficult, and I both really love it because of how terrifying it manages to be with such little going on, and hate it because I'm the one who has to play it. All three phases of Pizzeria Simulator offer a unique and equally enjoyable experience for their own different reasons. I feel like each one of these gameplay phases are so well crafted that each individual one could have been an entire game on their own, so to have them all tied together into a singular experience makes Pizzeria Simulator feel like a really large and finished game. They all work together to create an experience which is entirely unique to this entry. And with the three of them, it's no wonder how addicted I became to starting new save files of this game and trying new ways to play each and every one of them. There's so much content packed into this game that you can really get lost trying to find the best ways to build your pizzeria, or develop the best strategy for beating the office phase. And most points in the game also greatly encourage looking for the previously mentioned secrets to find one of the many endings to the game's story. And speaking of the story, that's the next major part of this game I would love to cover in detail, as I feel that narratively, this game is one of, if not the strongest in the entire series. The story of Pizzeria Simulator is one which is largely veiled in a mystery as to what is even going on up until the very end of the game. It's a game which is purposely designed to keep you asking questions as to what the big picture is. Things like who we play as, why we bought this pizzeria, why we salvage these terrifying animatronics, why the hell we sit in a cramped vent space every day, and what the hell is up with Lefty? These are all questions which course through our mind over the course of the main game's story, and if we successfully salvage all the animatronics like we were told to, we get answers to every single one of them in what I believe to be the best moment in the entire franchise.
Connection terminated. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Elizabeth, if you still even remember that name, but I'm afraid you've been misinformed. You are not here to receive a gift. Nor have you been called here by the individual you assume, although you have indeed been called.
To summarize the story of Pizzeria Sim, we, the player, are actually Michael Afton, son of William Afton, aka Springtrap. Somewhere along the line of this game's story, we came across Henry, old founder of Fazbear Entertainment, who was devising a plan to end the pain and suffering brought on by the murders committed by William Afton years prior. This plan entailed us, the player, putting together a pizzeria which would be designed as a trap for all the animatronics whose souls had not yet been freed. These animatronics being Circus Baby, Ennard, Springtrap, and the Puppet. We spend every single night salvaging these characters as they are lured into the building one by one, and before they can even realize the reality of their own situation, the building is lit aflame and their souls are put to rest. It's a sad, fulfilling ending to the entire franchise, which stuck with me more than any other moment for many of the games. The slow, dramatic reveal as to the true meaning behind everything you've been doing, the blaring soundtrack which echoes through the cutscene alongside the sounds of banging and alarms, and the amazing visuals of the animatronics burning away in the small vent spaces. It's a moment which gives me goosebumps every single time I see it, and it's a moment I will never forget. I know in my FNAF 3 video I stated that I felt that game would have been the best conclusion to the franchise. However, revisiting this game has completely changed my mind about that opinion. This cutscene, this reveal, this is the proper ending that the FNAF series needed. It does everything it needs to create a perfect conclusion. It ties up all the loose ends that were present, leaving just enough of a mystery intact to fuel the theories of the fans while also making major reveals we never knew to the story, like the true identity of the puppet. Of course, in typical FNAF fashion, this game didn't end up being the ending at all, but honestly, that doesn't really bother me anymore. The games that came out after FNAF 6, although not really acting as conclusions to the series, each have their own merits that make them worth playing and being a part of the franchise. This game, no matter how many sequels are released, will always have the benefit to me of being the narrative conclusion to the FNAF games made by Scott himself, even if a game like Ultimate Custom Night came after, which I view as being a sort of epilogue game canonically. Another aspect of this game's story I love, other than its conclusiveness, comes from the many different Easter eggs riddled throughout it. The Easter eggs in FNAF games have always been one of their most important aspects, acting as a fun way for fans to try and learn more and discover secrets within the games. Pizzeria Sim has some of the most Easter eggs out of any game in the series, and each one works to expand upon the story by adding more mysteries and providing clarity to past events we knew very little about. There are 3 main minigames within the Tycoon phase of FNAF 6 which you can buy that have really important Easter eggs behind them. These minigames being Fruity Maze, Midnight Motorist, and the Security Puppet. The secrets inside each of these minigames are triggered when specific criteria has been met, and each one is meant to reveal some disturbing parts of the FNAF lore, or give context to events we already knew about. The first of these minigames being Fruity Maze. Fruity Maze is a game which takes the appearance of an innocent Pac-Man-esque arcade game, where your objective is to collect as many fruits in the maze as possible. On a first-time playthrough of this minigame, that's all it seems to be. However, things start to deteriorate each time you win the game. After you beat this game and play through it a second time, you begin to see the imagery of dead dogs all over the maze. The music plays much more slowly, and flowers can be picked up in the place of the fruit. Beating this a second time reveals the true colors of the minigame, where we begin to see the once bloody dogs completely mutilated all over the maze, with many of the power-ups glitching out, and the girl in the reflection of the arcade cabinet crying with a very familiar yellow rabbit standing behind her. As the timer gets close to reaching 0, we can hear the sound of a car alarm going off, which is then followed by this. This minigame is extremely unsettling the first time you play through the game, acting as the first time we actually got to see ourselves how William Afton lured the children from the missing children's incident into the back rooms to be killed. It's very well done, and over the course of both this game and the other installments of the series, it's heavily implied that this girl would go on to possess Chica. Finding this particular Easter egg was one of the most surprising and creepy parts of my first playthrough, and what I loved about this was that it made me realize there was so much more going on behind the scenes of this game than I originally thought. Moving on from Fruity Maze, we have the Midnight Motorist Easter egg. This one is specifically triggered when you move yourself into a small opening at the bottom of the screen near the final lap of the regular game, and it brings you into one of the most confusing and convoluted minigames in the whole series. In this one, you find yourself driving down a rainy street in the middle of the night as music which slowly gets quieter plays in the background. There are a couple of places you can go in this minigame, those 2 places being a strange restaurant-looking building called Junior's, where you're told you're not allowed to go there anymore by a weird-looking green dude at the doors. Or you can go back to your house. Going back to your house is where this minigame gets really, really weird. This section of the minigame starts with us entering our house, where we're greeted by someone sitting in the living room watching TV. They tell us to leave him alone tonight, and after slamming on our son's bedroom door, our character goes outside where we see a trail of footprints supposedly trailing to a Fazbear's location. This minigame is weird, extremely convoluted, and is one of the pieces of lore we still know next to nothing about. The only things we can really go by with this minigame are based on assumptions we've made as a community towards it. Those assumptions being that in this minigame we play as William Afton, and the one sitting and watching TV is Michael Afton. But even if that's the case, we know nothing about when this happens, what point in the timeline this is supposed to represent, or what's even supposed to be happening. It's been 5 years since the release of this game, and this minigame remains an enigma to us who try to figure it out. And that's why this one is the one that fascinates me the most out of the three. I'd love to hear what you guys think is actually happening in this minigame, because trying to understand it better has been something I've been fixated on for a while now. The final minigame which has a secret hidden behind it is the Security Puppet. Security Puppet's minigame is one which is triggered by playing it more than 3 times in a row, where it immediately shows us a cutscene. This cutscene shows the puppet trapped inside of its gift box by a group of children who lock out a child that it was made to protect. As the puppet manages to escape its box, we see the child fade away, and we're able to go outside to chase after them. Going outside, we see the puppet begin to deteriorate in the rain, until arriving at the child's corpse, where it breaks down next to her. This minigame is possibly the most important one of them all, giving us a proper glimpse into the full backstory of the puppet. It's extremely sad watching as this puppet literally kills itself trying to save a girl in the rain who's already dead, and it brings a new layer to the puppet's backstory we never saw before. Out of all the minigames, this one is the easiest to understand, but it's also the most impactful. All 3 of these minigames act as a way to add layers to the story of a game which was already filled with interesting lore. They each have their own mysteries they bring in, some more than others, and act as a way to give us glimpses into the game's past we never got to before. Discovering each of these minigames was really interesting as well, seeing the sudden shift from the light-hearted tycoon phase to the more dark part of the story we've grown accustomed to. Overall, I find the story of Pizzeria Simulator to be the most gripping one the series has ever had, shrouding itself in just enough mystery that it keeps us guessing, while also giving us just enough for it to not become frustrating. I think it perfectly blends the amount of genuine story and mysteries to create an experience which genuinely invests those who care about this aspect of the franchise, and for that reason, I feel like it's one of the strongest. In fact, I found myself so invested in the story of this game that I ended up doing a ton of research on just the individual characters which make up the experience, as lore-wise, each and every one of the animatronics, mainly the salvageable ones, have some kind of interesting story as to how they even wound up in this game, which is why I'm deciding to make an entire segment dedicated to just the 4 main animatronics of this game. The roster of animatronics which try to kill you in Pizzeria Sim are one of the most unique the series has to offer. Each one exists from a different era of the timeline, with drastically different designs and lore as to how they even got into the game, which invests the player into finding out more about them. Each individual character has its own personality, its own story, and each one is one I genuinely found myself really invested in. Well, with one exception. But we'll get to that later.
Begin audio prompt in 3, 2, 1.
The first character I'll be covering is the first one we actually salvage in the game, Molten Freddy. Molten Freddy is the result of what happened after the other animatronics which made up Ennard's sister location decided to reject the parts of them which came from Baby, resulting in Funtime Freddy becoming the sort of leader of the pack. I find this character super cool, because his changed design really showcases the fact that without Baby, Ennard has become an absolute mess of parts which could barely hold itself together. When we see Molten Freddy, they aren't even able to hold together their body in the same way that Ennard did, instead forming into what looks like just a blob of mechanical wires. One thing I also love is the fact that we got Kellen Goff back to voice Molten Freddy. I've always felt that part of the reason Scott chose to separate Baby and Ennard was so that he'd have an excuse to get him back to reprise his role as the character. And whether or not I'm right about that, I don't care because I am all for it. Hearing the approaching sound of Molten Freddy's manic laughter in the vents is something which really freaks me out every single time I play FNAF 6, and I'm so glad this decision was made because of it.
Begin audio prompt in 3, 2, 1.
Moving on from Molten Freddy, I'd like to talk about the other half of the storyline of Ennard, that being Scrap Baby. As I said with Molten Freddy, Scrap Baby exists as the result of when the Funtime animatronics decided to reject Baby from their body, leaving her on her own to rebuild herself. I always thought Scrap Baby was one of the coolest characters in the entire series, because not only is her design absolutely amazing, but she works to fix all the problems I had with Baby as a character in Sister Location. Now, don't get me wrong, I think Baby is a phenomenal character in Sister Location. However, there are a couple issues I had with her that you may or may not agree with. My first issue was just the fact that we never really saw her. Baby was this character which was always used as the face of the game's trailers, teasers, and marketing, so I was really excited to see what they would do with her when the game came out. And although I ended up loving the way she was written, I felt that the game did a disservice to her by only having her really appear as an empty suit near the end. My other main issue with Baby in Sister Location is just the fact that she never got an opportunity to be a threat in the game. I understand why she wouldn't be in the main story, but I feel like her not being present in the custom night was a huge missed opportunity on Scott's part. Both of these issues, though, are completely fixed in this version of the character. Having this terrifying, evil version of Baby present throughout the game was a very pleasant surprise, and I thought it was awesome to see Heather Masters go full-on evil with her portrayal of the character in this game. The other thing I really love about Scrap Baby in this game is her design. I think it's so well done because there are parts of her that tell us where she would have been in her time rebuilding her body over the course of the storyline. Lights from her control module in Sister Location stick out of her torso. She has a claw for her arm which looks like it could have been the same one she used to kill Elizabeth, and a mask adorns her face now which looks like it could have potentially been the Springlock suit we were trapped in the fourth night of Sister Location. I just find it really cool because you can tell just from what she used to make her body that she would have had to go back to the old Sister Location years later and use parts from it to make her whole again. And the resulting design is absolutely amazing. I was very happy to see this design used again in later games, and Scrap Baby is definitely one of my favorites from this series.
Begin audio prompt in 3, 2, 1.
Moving on from Scrap Baby, we have possibly the most mysterious character in the entire game, Lefty. Now, I already said earlier that Lefty was my favorite character in FNAF 6, and I feel that way for more reasons than what I already explained. The main thing I love about Lefty was the mystery they added to the game for everyone's first playthrough. Alongside all of these pre-established characters, we see this unique, brand new animatronic who is just treated as importantly as the rest. We didn't know who or what Lefty was, what made them so dangerous, or why they were so important. All we knew was just that they were. And I know for me, that was definitely the mystery I wanted to solve the most. And then that's when the Easter eggs were discovered. More specifically, the secret Lefty death screen and the Lefty blueprint we see during Henry's secret tape in the Insanity ending.
set to new purpose, and used in ways I never thought imaginable. He lured them all back to a familiar place, back with familiar tricks. He brought them all together. Are they still aware? I hope not.
Both of these Easter eggs work together to show us that Lefty is actually an animatronic specifically designed for the purpose of tracking down and encapsulating the puppet inside of it, so that it wouldn't be able to escape when the building burnt down. This reveal was my favorite thing to learn from this game, because not only did it properly explain what made Lefty so dangerous and valuable to Henry, but it also gave me a weird sense of nostalgia. In my FNAF 3 video I made a year ago, I said that one of my favorite parts of that game was finding out that Springtrap had actually been the purple guy the entire time, because it gave a new, terrifying context to all the previous events which happened in that game. I got this same exact feeling when I learned about this with Lefty. This seemingly new character, which we thought we knew nothing about, was actually one of, if not the most important character in the entire series, and I thought that reveal was really, really cool. Another small thing about Lefty I love is just his design. I really love the Rockstar characters, especially Rockstar Freddy, and I think that even though Lefty is basically just a recolor of him, he looks awesome. The sleek black and red colors highlighted by the yellow eyes and the star on his chest look so visually appealing, and it really sets Lefty apart from the other characters in the game. I also just really love the contrast between Lefty and the other salvage animatronics, being the only one who is actually in any kind of good condition, yet being the most unstable of the four. All of these things just work together to make Lefty one of, if not my absolute favorite animatronic in the series, which is a pretty bold statement considering the fact that I also made that claim towards Springtrap in my FNAF 3 video. And speaking of Springtrap, I think it's finally time I stop ranting and raving about my love for Lefty and address the elephant in the room.
Begin audio prompt in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so in my videos, I've always tried to write them with the philosophy of focusing on the positives of each game I talk about. I like to hold this sort of mentality when making videos because I feel like there will always be someone out there who genuinely loves the thing I'm talking about, and I always want to give whoever that may be some kind of chance to have light shed on the thing they love. I'm saying all this because when it comes to Scraptrap, I just genuinely have nothing positive to say about the character. I believe wholeheartedly that this was the game which ruined Springtrap as a character, and I don't just mean in terms of his design. You see, what I loved about Springtrap in FNAF 3 was the sort of poetic irony I felt like his character represented. Springtrap was a character who, in my eyes, existed as the consequences of the actions of an evil man. William Afton was a man who murdered children for no reason, forcing them to possess the animatronics they once admired and live out a sad, pained existence as monsters who roamed the facilities they were trapped in. That's why I thought it was so cool to see him pay for his actions by becoming Springtrap and experience the exact same torture he put those children through. I think FNAF 3 perfectly encapsulated this idea, showing us a grotesque monster who was only capable of moaning in pain and wandering around Fazbear's fright like an empty husk. But when Pizzeria Simulator rolled around, it completely shattered this idea for me. By having Scraptrap talking to the player and acting like some super evil villain, it completely ruined the poetic justice of his original story. This version of Springtrap feels like he's happy to have died in the Springlock suit, treating it like dying a horrible, gruesome death was just some weird way of gaining more power. And I don't know if I'm alone in thinking this, but to me that just shattered what made Springtrap so interesting in the first place. By making him this super evil villain who loves being a possessed animatronic, Scott takes away what made Springtrap so cool to me, being the idea that this was a consequence of his actions. It honestly made me lose so much love I had for the character, because I know this was the direction he was gonna go in later games as well, beginning to feel more like a lich than a serial killer in some cases. Now, I will say, despite everything I've said about Scraptrap, I can still see how some people can find appeal in this direction the character was taken. I feel like the whole idea of this serial killer given new life as a monster that can just kill whoever he wants is pretty neat, and I feel like that's what Scott was going for with this. However, it just doesn't work for me because it conflicts so much with how I choose to interpret him. So as I said, if you like this version of Springtrap, I definitely get it, but I just can't find myself enjoying this direction he was taken. And then, of course, there's his design. I mean, what can I really say about Scraptrap's design that hasn't already been said? He just looks awful. His head is absolutely enormous. His limbs are so weirdly proportioned. His body is covered in these weird lumps that just pop up everywhere for some reason, and the anatomy of the human body inside of him is just wrong. This design is honestly just the cherry on top for reasons I cannot stand this version of Springtrap, and it honestly just works together with the direction his story was taken to make me lose a lot of the love I once had for him. When I play through FNAF 3 now, all I'm able to do when trying to appreciate Springtrap as a character is just think about the direction he was taken by this and later titles, and it honestly just makes me feel like I can't really say he's my favorite character in good faith anymore. Now, like I said several times, to each their own. If you love the direction Springtrap was taken, then I'd love to hear why, because one of my absolute favorite parts about FNAF and its community is how I feel like even the things that are really widely hated can be enjoyed by somebody, and hearing their take on it is really fun. Anyway, now that I got that rant out of my system, I think it's time I finally bring this analysis to a close. Pizzeria Simulator is a FNAF game which I feel like I've painfully underappreciated over the years I've loved this franchise. It has so much content in it that's really worth loving for any hardcore fan of the series. It was the game which I feel perfectly blended together both Scott's more comedic side of game design, as well as the horror we've grown to know the FNAF series for. It's a game full of complexity, and it provided us with the best narrative ending the series has ever received. If watching this video in any way made you want to try this game out for yourself, then please do. The game is one where you can tell that love went into it for both the series and the community. And mind you when I say all this, that it's free to play. You can experience everything I've talked about in this video and more without spending a single dollar on it. Which is something I just think is so damn cool of Scott to do. And getting to the end of this, I just want to thank everyone for 10,000 subscribers. I mean, at the time of recording this, the channel's almost at 20,000, so we've damn near doubled that by the time that this video is probably going up, which is just absolutely ridiculous to me, and I genuinely don't know where all of you came from. I remember when I first posted that FNAF 3 video last year, I was just doing it as an excuse to, rant and rave about something I was really passionate about, and I wasn't expecting any type of response from it. But then suddenly it's blowing up, and I make all these other videos, and people just seem so genuinely interested in what I have to make, and it's just been really, really cool. That's all I can really say, is just that it's really, really cool. I'm hoping to, in the future, begin making more videos for you guys because, it's very, very clear that you guys like what I've got to make on here. So, we'll see whatever I end up making in the future after this. And I hope whatever it is, you all end up enjoying it just as much as you've been enjoying everything else. Well, I hope to hear back from you all soon, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Goodbye.